Hi, I'm Brett Baer. This is SR in 60. It's actually not. This is SR in line. I feel like, what's that guy? Ron Burgundy.
Whatever
San Diego. This is Special Report Online. That's SRN 60 in the prompter that I did earlier today for Facebook. But this is Special Report Online, and we're happy to have you online with us. And if you haven't been here before, welcome aboard. Place you can ask questions, make a comment, talk to the panel. We have Steve and Susan and Tucker. What's the story that just dropped in the New York Times?
New York Times story that I think was just posted online that says the headline is, "Two women say Donald Trump touched them inappropriately." Okay. And it's one of them's from 25 years ago, 3 decades ago. A woman who was on the plane with Trump said that she didn't know him and he tried to touch her inappropriately, and I haven't gotten to the second one.
Okay.
Yet.
Yeah. So he was asked by Anderson Cooper at the debate, have you done anything like this? And he said, no, I have not. So, Tucker, what does this mean? Front page New York Times?
I don't know, I haven't read the piece, but I mean, I cease being shocked by any story like that. I mean, it kind of confirms what you sort of knew from, like, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 years ago about Donald Trump. I read Spy Magazine in the 80s in college, so I kind of knew this stuff. I'm not excusing it, of course. I'm just saying it's one of those things that, you know, seems with not the specifics of the story, which I have not read, but, like, we knew that Trump is, you know, he was like a frequent guest on Howard Stern. So, like, you know what I mean? I don't really know what to say beyond that. You sort of know his attitude.
So here it is. I mean, at the moment, sitting at a home in Manhattan, Jessica Leeds, 74, felt Donald Trump was lying when he said that Sunday. More than 3 decades ago, when she was traveling businesswoman at a paper company, she sat behind him in a first-class cabin on a flight to New York. They'd never met before. 45 minutes after takeoff, she recalled Mr. Trump lifting the armrest and began to touch her. All right, so this goes on into details that he was like an octopus, she said. Susan, how much effect does this have on this race? Because you saw the polls after the tape, and there was something different, like visceral, to listening to him talk on that bus. There was something different about it. Does this move the needle more than that?
I guess I don't know, and I haven't read the story. I would say I thought one of the reasons that the video was so powerful was because it was a video, and he didn't say he didn't recognize it, like with the emails, right? He acknowledged that was him talking, and so it was undeniable in the language that was so crude that it did have a big effect. It had an especially large effect on women voters. You know, we know from what early polling we've seen that women reacted in a much stronger way to this video than male voters did. So, you know, we're in kind of new territory here, aren't we? Where we're reading stories like this
every other day, something, you know, something. Meanwhile, you know, I mean, it's just fast and furious. You have something every day. I want to take a look at a couple of polls that came out, and one of them really struck me today, Steve, which was Utah. This Utah poll from Deseret News essentially has it tied. 26% for Donald Trump, 26% for Hillary Clinton, and 22% for Evan McMullin, who we've had on this show in center seat, the independent candidate. He is a Mormon. It's kind of a home court advantage in Utah, but he's within the margin of error in that state.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've seen polls in Utah before that have shown Trump and Clinton close. We haven't seen one with Evan McMullin doing nearly this well. I mean, breaking up into the 20s is a pretty significant jump for him. He could be a factor in Utah on Election Day. I don't think there's any question about it. I remember when we first started seeing Mitt Romney won Utah by, I believe, 70 points. Now, he's a favorite son, and he's Mormon, so there would be some additional affinity for Romney there. But Utah is about as deep red a state as you can find in the country, and the fact that Donald Trump is even with Hillary Clinton there, I think, does say something.
But it's also, after this tape came out, it was Jason Chaffetz. Mike
no
Lee. It was the governor of Utah. It was John Huntsman, collectively all coming out saying he needs to step off this ticket. I can can no longer endorse him.
Yes.
It was the Utah delegation essentially saying
No
that.
question. And look, it goes both ways, right? I mean, they knew that they were in pretty safe territory to be distancing themselves from Trump because previous polling had showed that Trump wasn't very popular in Utah. I mean, I do think, I asked Mike Lee about this at the Republican convention. I had a long interview with him on the first day of the convention, and I said, we've seen these polls that suggest that potentially Trump is vulnerable in Utah. Is that possible? I mean, is that crazy? And he said, no, I think it's entirely possible that Trump could lose Utah, particularly given the fact that there's going to be a campaign between now and November, and Hillary Clinton's going to tee up some nasty stuff on him.
Well, what happens if Mitt Romney endorses McMullen?
Yeah.
Because Mitt Romney,
And he very well may.
And he very well might, because he said he's not going to vote for Trump, but he hasn't been clear on who he is going to vote for. He doesn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton either. Could that mean he wins it?
Yeah.
Can I just make one point, though, that undergirding all of this are actual issues? I mean, I think it's possible Trump loses Utah, for sure. I'm not contesting that. But underneath it all, there are, like, disagreements about policy, and the core of them is immigration. So the Mormon Church, both for theological and practical reasons, finds Trump's views on immigration and refugee resettlement repugnant. And, I'm not even taking sides in that. I'm just saying it's worth noting that. And it's also the same with a lot of people here in Washington. Like, they disagree with his foreign policy views. They disagree with his views on immigration and trade. And so there are actual issues, and I think that the press has done a grave disservice, really, to voters in downplaying those in favor of the stylistic factors, which are also real. I mean, a lot of people look at Trump like, ew, he's gross, I'm not voting for him, which is a fair thing to conclude, I think. But it also, like, we should know that there are, like, structural problems here.
But the concern from Mormons about something like religious freedom, wouldn't that be something about Supreme Court choices that they would not lean towards Hillary Clinton and lean
well, that's
more
the only
towards
reason
Republican? Trump
is at, whatever, 26% or whatever, is like concerns about that. Utah is a very conservative state, in some ways the most conservative, but it is conservative in a different way. I mean, the Mormon Church is huge in Latin America. If you go to Guatemala City or, Tegucigalpa or any place in Central America, for example, massive Mormon temples. And so this stuff affects, they have a different vantage on this, I think.
But it's also just to pick up on the religious freedom issue. I mean, I agree with you generally on the policy issue, aren't getting enough attention as they otherwise might. On the religious freedom issue, that cuts both ways, I think. On the one hand, they'd probably rather have a Donald Trump Supreme Court if you believe that he's going to appoint sort of vaguely conservative people versus Hillary Clinton. On the other hand, Donald Trump has talked about banning an entire religion, and when you talk about protecting religious minorities, that's something that I think makes Mormons nervous. This is something that Mike Lee and Jason Chaffetz have said to me in the past.
And Mike Lee obviously was on the list to get Ted Cruz to sign on to Donald Trump's campaign, and then took himself off the list by saying he wanted Trump to step aside from the ticket. Wisconsin, this is a state where you see in the Marquette poll out today the evolution of the reaction to this tape. You see the Trump leading 41-40 on Thursday. Then the tape comes out, 44-38, and then Saturday, Sunday, 49-30. Now, at the same time, the Senate race in the same poll, which is Ron Johnson and Russ Feingold, which is supposed to be all Russ Feingold's, is tied within the margin of error. I mean, it seems strange that some of these states are splitting like that.
Yeah, that is surprising. If Wisconsin goes to the degree it was by the third day of their polling, it'll be very hard for Ron Johnson to win. I mean, it's hard. The Senate candidates can make up a certain amount of ground. They can make up, 5 or 6 points. Making up 10 points, that's a really difficult task, because we have become a nation that is increasingly not inclined to split our ballot. So that's, that shows Ron Johnson in a stronger position than we have expected him to be. But he's got to be very troubled by the numbers for the top of the ticket.
For sure. If you see a landslide or a collapse, either way, it really does affect down ballot a lot.
The Senate chances that it stays Republican?
Probably not high. Does it matter? That's the macro question I haven't heard a single person ask. Ask anyone in business. When was the last time you saw something come out of the Congress that really affected your life? And they'll all say, well, it was Obamacare and Dodd-Frank. After that, I can't remember. When was the last time one of the agencies did something that affected you? Like yesterday. The balance of power in Washington, beneath our gaze, has shifted so dramatically to the executive. The Republicans have the largest majority in the Congress and the state houses they've had in lifetimes. What effect has that had? I'm sure there's some effect, like someone could tell me. I'm sure, Paul Ryan has a list of the effects. I don't really notice any of them. It has had no real effect on America, which has moved dramatically left during that time. So really, and I think this is a sad thing, what really matters is who controls the executive branch, actually. It really does.
But the big things that you mentioned, like Obamacare, got through because you had unified government.
For sure,
you had a Democratic
that's right.
White House,
Right.
Democratic House, Democratic Senate. So if you have that situation for the first 2 years of what might be a Clinton administration, that puts Democrats in a much better position to try to pass
There's no doubt about it.
And I also think, if you look at the states, I think you're half right. I think if you look at the states and you look at the progress that states with Republican governors and Republican legislatures have made on things like right to work, on things like rolling back preferences for unions, on things like taxes, they're more conservative states than they were 10 years ago. On the executive, though, you're absolutely right. This is what you want to talk about, a failing of the media. It's a hard story to cover because it's not at all a sexy story. But you look at the way in which the Obama administration has empowered the administrative state and given additional resources and power and to the bureaucracies, and the extent to which they are sort of running on their own is incredible. And you do hear this. You hear this, and I think the left would say, well, these are just big businesses complaining. They're not big businesses. They're small businesses in many cases, or they're ranchers.
But look at Obamacare. So the bill itself is whatever, this tall, and then the regulations are 20,000 pages.
Exactly. Yeah.
20,000 pages.
And that's what matters in the bill. But take 3 steps back even from that. So in the last 20 years, what are the 2 big stories in American life? The first is what we've done abroad, trying to remake a region and failing to do that. And the second is interest rates, which are their lowest rate in 5,000 years. Our monetary policy has driven our economy. What has Congress had to say about both of those things? Really not so much. One, of course, the Fed just drives it completely, and Congress has no role. And in our foreign wars, really, I guess they've taken some votes on it, but really that was driven by the executive. So actually, the Congress has kind of taken itself out of the game on the questions that really matter.
Terry MD says, I think the effect of the tape will wear off. One more debate to go. 30 days is a long time. The political happenings, lots of time for more and more revelations. He suggests WikiLeaks. Susan, we talked about earlier, it would have to be earth-shattering to break through what we've seen.
I guarantee you something's going to happen in the next 27 days that we can't predict at this table today.
How big would it have to be to affect the Hillary Clinton campaign?
Well, it would have to be something that, what the WikiLeaks leaks so far generally show is that she's a politician, which we know. I think for WikiLeaks to break through, it needs to be something that we wouldn't expect, or something that's clearly illegal or totally inappropriate. And I don't think we've seen things that are sort of tantalizing, but I don't think we've seen that yet. But there's also possible that in the next 27 days we'll see some revelation on the part of Mr. Trump that has an effect as well.
But I saw things that were pretty amazing to me. I couldn't have a lower opinion of the press, and yet I didn't know they were totally corrupt. I didn't know John Harwood was actually giving campaign advice to the Hillary campaign. He was. The email proves it, unless he's going to claim it's a forgery done by Putin or something. I think that's kind of a big story. And by the way, you would think that the press, which demands openness and should, from every other institution in American life, would be open about how this happened. So the New York Times and CNBC would be taking questions like, really, John Harwood's giving campaign advice?
Sure, but what is the biggest thing? What is the thing that changes the campaign dynamic?
Probably not. First of all, as I noted, again, it's not on the Washington Post or New York Times website, front page right now. I just checked. And so, if you don't disseminate the news, it can't have an effect. I'm not saying, look, Trump is losing because of things that Trump did. I'm not blaming the media for Trump's screw-ups. They're his fault. But I also think if you believe that Hillary Clinton is going to be the president, and everyone I know believes that in the press anyway, you have a kind of a moral obligation to cover her in a real way, and they're just not.
I also think some of that could...
Isn't there a possibility, though, that the pendulum swings, or is this decided? Is it usually what the press does is they focus this way and they don't cover something, and then it swings and the story changes, and he's the comeback kid, but it doesn't seem like there's a comeback kid.
Look, I think there could be an external... Look, I think in all likelihood Hillary Clinton's going to be the next president of the United States. Is there an external event that could change the outcome of the race? I think that's possible. I don't think it's likely, but if we had a massive terrorist attack on the U.S. homeland right now, and Hillary Clinton, in responding to it, said something that suggests, like her line from her Georgetown University speech where she said we need to show empathy to the enemies. Yeah, that could sink her, something like that. But otherwise, it's hard to come up with something that could do that. Just to pick up on Tucker's point, I think that's exactly right. And maybe one of the reasons that this isn't getting more attention has to do with the fact that news organizations are worried about what might be reported about them. I mean, what
I don't think that's true. I mean,
really?
I think it's fine to fault the press for not covering this with more intensity, and I think we definitely ought to cover agencies with more energy. And so there are lots of ways to criticize the press, but I don't think this is a calculation on the part.
I mean, let me say there's a combination of things. I'm not saying that would be the only reason, but I think there has to be a certain. I mean, you see, emails like the one from the Washington Post White House bureau chief giving a heads up to John Podesta that he was going to be mentioned in her story in maybe an unfavorable light. And you could, if you're a journalist, you could say, she's just giving him a heads up. On the other hand, you could say, why is she giving him a heads up and not asking him questions about this? I mean, he's got a conflict of interest. Where's the reporting on that? And I think it invites additional scrutiny of these journalists and the institutions they represent.
Well, here's how you know it's corrupt. I had a reporter call over the Post about that exact email yesterday, and we also had one call over to CNBC and the New York Times about John Harwood's emails. I just asked her, what do you make of this? In all three cases, we got no comment. Really? How can the press, being the press, in good conscience say, we're not going to comment on this? Don't you have a moral obligation to? Yes, you do. And they won't. And what's the excuse for that? Well, they just don't feel like it. No one's going to make them. That's corruption. I don't know what's the alternate explanation for that.
Now, I will say there is a double standard here because the media who cover media are not giving this the same coverage that they gave when the Obama administration said that Fox News was an arm of the Republican Party. And remember that? Even though the news side of Fox was continuing what we did every day, which was getting stuff answered and asking questions. Anyway, that's a little closer to home. Susan, is there a way that Republicans hold on to the Senate?
Yes. And in fact, one thing in favor of that possibility is that Republicans who are running for re-election in the Senate have understood for a year that they needed to have independent campaigns, not to rely on the top of the ticket, as somebody like Rob Portman has managed to do pretty skillfully. So yes, I think Republican senators have done a surprisingly good job of kind of separating themselves from Trump. It just matters on if Donald Trump loses. I think it matters how big he loses. And how much ground they have to make up. But yes, I think it's possible. And I actually think it's unlikely that Democrats get the House. It's a stretch for Democrats to get the House. Yeah. We're just talking about it because it's now in the realm of possibility, not because it's likely.
It's a lot of seats.
Spearhead says, Tucker is my #1 favorite. Amped up, hyperactive, super caffeinated, ultra passionate pundit on Fox. He's wired, smart, and knowledgeable. Spearhead, big fan.
Can I say one thing that I've been obsessed with? By the way, no caffeine, just Nicorette. Just Nicorette, which I love. I think at the end of this, there are going to be a lot of sincere lefties, and some on the right too, but sincere lefties who are really worried about what they just saw. Because here you have, this is the ominous development, leaving aside the election, Trump, Hillary, whatever. You have an alignment for the first time in like 150 years in this country of media, academia, Hollywood, the political class, and big business. And so basically every power center in America is on the same side of one question. Now you can agree with them on that question and still have a real concern about concentration of power in that few hands, actually. Because basically when everybody who wields power in the country agrees, they can do anything. And there's nothing you can do about it. And there was a huge constituency going back to Teddy Roosevelt of people on the left, the progressive left, who didn't want to see that. You know, they're the ones who pushed the anti-monopoly legislation because they're like, you know what, it's not good for the rest of us without power if all the powerful people agree. I don't know. I think this is a big deal. No one, you're looking like I'm crazy.
No, I mean, I think there's a point there. I think it's just oversimplified. I don't think you can say the political class all shares the same views on these things. No.
Against Trump?
No, well, I mean, against Trump,
anybody in that
Bernie Sanders agrees with Trump on certain things.
I know, but you don't see the Bernie Sanders people getting livid about Donna Brazile and the town hall question.
No, I mean, I bet if you interviewed them, the rank and file Bernie Sanders supporters, they'd be pretty livid. Yeah. You know, they'd be upset about this stuff.
But there's this feeling that Trump is so bad that we can like kind of justify anything. I mean, someone actually said, a friend of mine who's a lefty said to me the other day, I was like, really? I was complaining about this press stuff. And he's like, well, yeah, but I mean, it's Trump. Like, he could be president and destroy America. As soon as you decide that the ends, justify the means, I don't know, boy, you wind up in some ugly places, I think. And I'm not saying that to defend Trump. But it's just
agree.
True.
The press obligation in this election is like the press obligation to everyone.
Yes,
and that's
right.
to cover both sides and let Americans decide.
Exactly.
All right, but quickly, what could Hillary Clinton get done with Democratic Senate and Democratic House? What
Well,
would she get done?
Yeah, well, that's a great
We better
question.
start asking that question.
So, Supreme Court, right? They'll be opening there, and more to follow. She might try to work on fixes for Obamacare, because that's going to be a big issue. And she's talked about, she's outlined many 6-point PowerPoint.
I mean, she couldn't get through
initiatives.
gun legislation.
I think guns is hard. I mean,
Immigration, certainly.
Guns might pass
Immigration.
on some of these state initiatives on guns might pass, but it's hard to imagine her taking on guns. That issue, it's such a difficult issue, right? I mean, I assume she wants to choose an issue or two where she can get something done that will be big, because her window for doing this is not going to be that long.
Well, look at Obamacare. I mean, that was the first choice.
That's right. You need to choose. I think immigration reform might be the number one thing she would choose to do, because that is a promise Democrats have made to Latino voters for 3 presidential elections, and eventually they're going to need to.
And she'll get some Republicans to sign on to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would say 2 issues: immigration reform for sure, and Obamacare fixes, but fixes in the direction of the left. I mean, the center of gravity, in the Democratic Party is now and will be, if she wins and the scenario you described happens, to the left, to the far left of the Democratic Party. I mean, Elizabeth Warren is going to be a huge power broker. So that's where the locus of power, where the grassroots energy and excitement is going to be. Hillary Clinton may not be as ideological as Barack Obama. Nobody really is as ideological as Barack Obama. Sure. But Hillary Clinton knows, if she wants to be reelected, that she's got to sort of stroke that core constituency that's going to provide the energy and excitement for the Democratic base. And I think she's more pragmatic than Obama is. Again, most people are more pragmatic than Obama is, but I think her pragmatism actually drives her to the left. So I don't see her as this sort of centrist deal maker that I think some Republicans are imagining she might be.
There's only one thing that matters. Is one of the guy who works for her said at the end of the day, it's not an election, it's a census. So if at the end she wins, she'll still have had to really do a lot to fight off Trump, and he's hurt her in the meantime. She spent more money than anybody's ever spent on any campaign ever. And so what's the lesson she learns? You've got to change the population. There are huge parts of this country, particularly in the middle of the country, who just don't like Democrats. And so you've got to bring in sympathetic voters. I mean, that's immigration reform. I don't know why that's a euphemism for changing the population of the country.
There's a guy that says that President Obama will protectively pardon Hillary Clinton before he leaves office.
Preemptively pardon?
Yeah.
A pardon to use when you need it?
Yeah, like a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Right.
The question is how much they could get done together if Republicans control the House.
Okay, call me crazy, but I think it is possible that you could have Hillary Clinton and Paul Ryan as Speaker of the House.
Oh, you're crazy.
Do some things.
No, I'm just kidding.
I totally agree with that. I don't think that's crazy.
I think they both want to do things.
Well,
right?
he's rooting for her.
And there's things on
But
which
just
they
because
disagree.
even if he were rooting for her doesn't mean that he agrees with her on everything.
I think he agrees with her on the big things. He agrees with her on immigration.
If you think that immigration is the big thing, then you would think that. But I don't think that he agrees with her. He totally disagrees with Hillary Clinton on the size and scope of government.
Right.
He's dedicated his entire professional
Which is totally
career
determined
to
by
shrinking.
who lives here. So, like,
no, I mean,
if you're trying to do, if you say 11 million people who are here illegally is a problem, we should try to do something about that. That's an issue maybe on which they think.
The question is, do they vote or not? So do you add 11 million people to the voter pool? And that clearly helps the Democratic Party. I mean, so why is that not priority? Well, I'm not attacking. I'm just saying that's true. If you legalize everyone who's here illegally, you just have a huge number of new Democratic voters. Like, why is that not true? It is true.
Unless you provide legal status, it's not a path to citizenship. That was part of the whole debate last time around.
That's what Rubio did before. Well, this has been fun. Breaking news at Special Report Online. Susan, thanks for being here. Love to have you back. Guys, you're always here, so I'm not going to thank you. Special Report Online every Wednesday. We're going to head to Vegas this weekend, Fox News Sunday in Vegas. See you there. Control room, a little goodbye.